Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host. I'm a filmmaker on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode I pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on streaming. I pick a favourite film from that topic and battle it out against a guest to decide which film will become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 1. Hello, podsters or podroonies, if you prefer. This episode, as Gladiator 2 is out, we are talking Ridley Scott Films 2, the sequel. I love Ridley Scott. We've done quite a few Ridley Scott films in the past. Our first one we did... what was it? Thelma and Louise versus Gladiator. That's why you won't be hearing any much, Gladiator talk from the first movie. It's because we've already talked about that one, so do check that episode out. And we've also done a space films episode where me and my old co-host both picked Ridley Scott films in Alien and The Martian, so we do like our Ridley Scott films on this episode, so we're doing another one to celebrate Gladiator 2. And of course, I can't be talking alone. Oh no, people, that would be stupid. I am joined by one of the Movie Bonerz today. Dustin, how are you, sir?
I'm well, man. Well, yeah, it's kind of weird not having, I guess, the other boner with me, but yeah.
The other real.
Doing well, man. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So if the folks at home don't know already, tell us about your podcast and where can we find you, sir?
Oh, man. Well, we're Movie Bonerz with a Z. You can find us pretty much everywhere, anywhere right now. We are just two film-loving schmucks. That's kind of how our whole friendship started. And back in 2020, we decided to turn that into a nice little show all about movies, some things about the industry that I think a lot of people don't realize. And it's just fun talking about why we love movies. So that's what the whole basis is. Yeah, awesome. It's a good time, man. It's a real good time.
Good. So I remember when I was on your podcast when we were talking about the prequel Alien films for when Alien Romulus came out. A lot of fun. Do check that episode out.
Oh, yeah.
And we got on to talking about Gladiator 2 at some point. And I remember you weren't terribly enthused that it was announced.
Nope.
So obviously there's been more trailers come out.
Yeah.
Still the same opinion? Or
if anything, even more sold that it is not going to be great.
Okay.
Even less excitement for it.
All right.
I think it was like the second trailer they released. Second or third trailer. It was whatever one that they revealed that his dad is Maximus or was Maximus.
Yeah.
The dialogue in it, I found myself, I don't remember what I was watching. I saw it in the theater and the dialogue came out. And when he said, "I will have my vengeance," I just put my head down and was like, oh, good Lord. They're just regurgitating. Dialogue now. We're just regurgitating the dialogue. Like, sorry, dude, you might be a fine actor. And I'm still going to see Gladiator 2 because I have to.
Of course.
But I was like, you're not going to deliver the same intensity that Russell Crowe did back in 2000.
Yeah.
But I do have hopes that it will be a better sequel than Joker 2 was. So there's that.
It's a low bar.
I know, not hard to do. You kind of don't even have to try and you'll succeed. So I've got that going for me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not interested in Joker 2 whatsoever. I mean, I really hated the first one.
Oh, man. Dude, if you hated the first one, buckle up.
I probably love the second one, who knows?
I don't know, dude. I don't know. I think that was even one of those movies that was a stretch for people that like stuff out of the norm to even really care for. So
it was interesting hearing Tarantino's thoughts on it. He was like, it's just kind of a fuck you to Hollywood, apparently.
Well, it is, And Tarantino also said it's kind of like a fuck you to the fans. And that was one that I was like, you're right, it was. That's why it was hated so much. Because fans of movies, fans of these characters were like, what is this nonsense? So
yeah, I mean, I heard a reel on Instagram, I think today, with one podcaster saying, like, I think they went down the direction they did with Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix because they thought that they didn't really realize that people were really kind of getting on board with this Joker character as like a sympathetic character and a very like a hero, an anti-hero basically. Mm-hmm. And they were like, hang on, that's not the point, guys. You're missing it. Yeah. So I feel like it's a reaction. The second one is a reaction to that kind of response to the first film. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we're talking Gladiator.
Anyways, we're talking Scott. Ridley Scott.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm fairly excited for it. I mean, I love the first one. The first one I've seen quite a lot. Mm-hmm. I always love that last scene when Derek Jacobi is like seeing Maximus's body on the floor, on the ground in this huge arena. And he's like, who will help me carry him? And then everyone kind of walks forward. That always gets me teary.
Oh, yeah.
That's such a great moment. Always remember that. But yeah, I'm a bit with you. Certainly with the second trailer, the dialogue is like not great. From like, you can really see like Denzel Washington, who we'll talk about a lot soon, really trying to do his best to elevate this kind of bad writing. But who knows? I mean, it's just a trailer. So hopefully it'll be good. And I do like Paul Mescal, a great little British TV show that kind of made his name, Normal People.
Okay.
With Daisy Edgar Jones. So I know he's got incredible acting chops. Whether he can do the action is yet to be seen. From the trailer, it looks like he can. I mean, I guess middling excitement for me.
I mean, he definitely looks like he's doing a good job fighting or dodging a horribly CGI'd rhino and monkeys. So
yeah, who knows?
CGI.
So we are talking Ridley Scott films for this episode, and you're up first, sir. What is your Ridley Scott film of choice for you?
Dude, I'm not gonna lie, like, when I talked to Jake, he's not here, obviously, but him and I still did this as a team, figuring out what movie to pick. Yeah, we were both like, wow, how do we pick a Ridley Scott film that's not Gladiator, not Alien? And ironically, we were both like, and not Blade Runner. So, like, what should we do? And we ended up coming down to two films that we both feel are incredible movies, but never get kind of the love and recognition that they deserve. So one was Black Hawk Down, and then the other is American Gangster. Yeah. And Jake and I, being who we are, we sided with the gangster film because we really, really like our gangster movies. And so
awesome.
American Gangster is our pick. I think it's such a cool story. For those that don't know, it is about Frank Lucas, who during the Vietnam War was a drug kingpin gangster in New York, who, as the country ended up learning, became kind of infamous for smuggling pure heroin with the coffins of fallen soldiers coming from Vietnam. If that makes your stomach turn, it should. Yes. But as a human being who had zero respect or care, anything for human life, it's not shocking in that aspect that he would go to these lengths to not only bring these kinds of drugs into the country, but to kind of reign over that part of New York. So as this was happening, a narcotics investigator named Richie Roberts had this team assembled who ultimately brought Frank Lucas down. So American Gangster tells this story from Lucas's rise and to his fall. And it's such a cool gangster movie. It does a lot of stuff that every gangster movie does, but it does it in some pretty fun, pretty unique ways. There's definitely moments throughout the whole thing that make your stomach turn just from how flawed and messed up everybody of that time was. And I know the movie depicts Richie Roberts as like this perfect cop who doesn't take the money that he finds. You know, they talk a lot during the movie of him turning in $1 million that he could have just kept for himself because it was dirty cops during that era. But he's also depicted as someone who can make really good decisions and then equally make horrible decisions regarding his personal life, regarding just his relationships and all that. So one of my favorite aspects of American Gangster is the fact that like everybody is so messed up in this movie. It's just varying degrees, but it's a really interesting, based on a true story, which is kind of funny to say. And I'm sure we'll get into it considering it's Ridley Scott doing a based on true story. And he's pretty infamous for not sticking with true events. So
Napoleon, sorry.
Napoleon comes to mind. Gladiator 2, apparently. Yeah. So that, you know, regardless, it's a very intriguing story that Ridley Scott does such a great job of throwing you into that time period and immersing you into every aspect of it and kind of reminding you that drugs and this gangster life was not just bottled up between these families or between these gangsters, but it bled into pop culture and was kind of celebrated. These gangsters mingled with celebrities, with actors and politicians and all this. So I think American Gangster does a great job of subtly reminding you that this kind of stuff doesn't stay just in this part, but it actually is influenced and spread farther than you might want to admit. So, yeah.
I think initial reactions for me, I remember seeing it at university and I really enjoyed it. And the brutality was quite shocking to see as well, with the violence especially. You know, it's kind of like nothing new, I guess, in terms of this genre of gangster films. You see it a lot with, you know, Scorsese films, etc. But there's certainly a few scenes where I'm like, it kind of ups it a little bit. I'm like, whoa, I did not expect that.
That opening shot with Denzel setting the dude on fire.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's that kind of story. Okay.
Yeah, and just the performances between Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe were outstanding. And there's a lot of like kind of, as you were saying, a lot of kind of influences like Serpico kind of thing with the corrupt cops in here, and the fact that Crowe's character Richie Roberts has got to kind of try and battle Frank Lucas and his own colleagues at the same time. Certainly that first hour. But yeah, it's really interesting as well what you're saying with the fact that the perception of gangsterism at this time was seen as kind of had an influence on pop culture as well. And you definitely kind of get that sense from the stylistic choices that Ridley Scott goes with. Certainly the montage scenes in particular. Yeah. Right, let's get into it then.
Yeah, right.
So, did you watch the director's cut, by the way?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. We are not ones that, if there's a director's cut versus a theatrical, we're going to go with the director's cut like 9.5 times out of 10. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I know Jake offered to, sent me a link or whatever, but I didn't have the time to watch the full version.
Okay, no worries.
Ridley Scott's vision, but it'll be interesting.
Really, the biggest difference between the two cuts is really the very, very end.
Okay.
Yeah, but the rest of the movie is pretty much, if you've seen the theatrical, you've seen for the most part. Yeah, don't feel bad, bud.
All right. I want to see it. Right, directing then. So the first thing I noticed about the directing from Ridley Scott is the subtle differences in the direction of Denzel Washington's scenes and Russell Crowe's scenes. With Denzel's scenes, it's usually very stylish, and Denzel is never presented in a way that kind of undermines his character. You always feel like he has everything under control.
Mm-hmm.
There's very little tension or fear for his life when he's on screen, especially within like the first half an hour when there's like threats everywhere. You feel like he has this kind of presence that, you know, that he's kind of untouchable already kind of thing. You know, he's shot in a way that always makes Denzel look good. There's like a great montage scene when the blue magic hits the streets and he's like in disguise in his car. And there's some great like slow
reveling and watching his work spread.
Yeah. And everything feels very smoothly run, even though this whole business, I can imagine, I'm not involved in it, obviously. It's very messy. You know, with Russell Crowe's scenes, though, it mostly feels very tough and rough. Like
it's very Russell Crowe's scenes are very chaotic almost, especially when he's actually engaging with criminals. It's almost like quickened. The shots are faster. They're dirtier. There's a lot more going on. So you brought up with Denzel, it seems very structured, very polished. It's a very, like, it's not even a subtle switch between the two. And it's cool, like, because you're watching it and then you jump to him in a courtroom and immediately, even him in the courtroom, you know, him opening his briefcase just to get his notes out is still flimsy. You know, he's fumbling with papers, whereas Denzel in his first couple scenes, he's very reserved. He's very confident and all that. So yeah, the directing style, I love how Ridley Scott showed the two different stories, but put them in the same world. So although they're shot differently, you never feel like they're never not together. So it still makes sense, you know, oh, this is still New Jersey. This is still, you know, Manhattan.
There's not like a massive difference, but it's very subtle. But certainly there's a few scenes with Russell Crowe's character where the handheld cameras come out and, you know, the violence certainly in the beginning is always with his character. Still very well done with some very like effective, like fast cutting. You know, that ambulance scene though was very tense indeed when like Russell Crowe is trying to save his partner from this projects building where he's accidentally shot this guy dealing drugs. You know, they pretend he's still alive and there's this mob outside. That was very effective for me. So when like Denzel turns up on screen, I felt like I could relax a bit more in a way. Could calm down.
In a way, until he just walks out into the middle of the day and pulls the trigger on a guy.
So when Denzel shows up for Murdering Gangster, I felt relaxed.
Right.
But the scene that kind of breaks the mold that Ridley Scott kind of establishes for nearly 2 hours, that gets broken when Frank takes his wife to a Chinese takeaway restaurant, but she wants to kind of wait in the car. And again, it feels very smooth. But when Frank gets like the keys to the car and just looks over his shoulder, you get this like really close in shot of his face. And he sees this car start to come towards him. So as soon as you see this shot, the directing mold for this character, if you will, is broken, and the tension goes right up as the handheld cameras come out, and there's like a near miss on his wife's life. You know, incredibly simple from Ridley Scott, but just shows that, you know, he's a master at work as a filmmaker here. The fact that he's just kind of established this very clear stylistic tone for Denzel, and then with this one shot, it's kind of completely broken. The rhythm of how this character is presented is broken within that one shot for me. It was quite striking that.
See, there's that shot for me, but then to me, he kind of foreshadows that, you know, Denzel's world is not as under order or organized as he's presenting, is when he gets stopped by Trupo and his crew with the drugs in the trunk, because his whole demeanor changes there, and just the way that it's shot, you know, they're in that alley, to me, that's like, it's not a complete like melding of the two, but it's really close, where Denzel or Frank Lucas, you know, he's so business oriented, you know, he's very even keeled, he's very just straight to the point. But as soon as Trupo opens the the trunk, Denzel does this great job of like dropping that, because all of a sudden he's forced to be vulnerable and forced to understand like, oh, your world is not as pristine as you're trying to make it look. Of course, as soon as Trupo's gone, then he goes right back into his mentality, beats the hell out of his brother, and then they move on with the world. But the scene you're talking about I agree with you, it does kind of establish that, where Richie Roberts is the cop whose whole world is drugs, and it's constantly affecting his life, his career. It's so messy. It's so gross. And he's in the thick of it. Whereas like Frank Lucas kind of has that disconnect from the effects and the actual world of drugs. We've got that montage where he's disguising himself just to watch it flow and work, but he's not a part of the world. Well, he is. No. You know what I mean? He's not actually like kind of seeing the consequences.
He does it his own way. Like he cuts out the middlemen, and he's messing up the natural order of things. Is I think what they mention in the film. And the only way he can kind of express himself when things go wrong is violence. He's using violence, and
which he does.
And as you mentioned, when they find the drugs in the trunk of his brother's car, the only thing he can think of doing is just like bashing his head against the window, and you're just like, whoa, where the hell did that come from? Because he's like Denzel is a very like assured, steely character throughout the film, and when things like that happen, it's just like he doesn't know how to solve it in the right way for his own family. And like there's other scenes with the violence which are kind of really interesting, because obviously with Chiwetel Ejiofor, his brother, he's got these flashy suits, and Denzel's like, don't be the loudest person in the room, you'll end up being the weakest person in the room or whatever. And like his driver, like, does he shoot him in the leg or the other way around?
So the driver shoots the cop that comes to the party in the leg, and then Denzel beats him inside of the piano.
Yeah.
Which is always a scene that I'm like, I can't imagine how painful.
In front of everyone in the room.
Right. Like there's no hold bar. I think one of the cool things that they do with this, and this comes a lot from Ridley Scott's directing and then Denzel's performance, is the idea that Denzel does have this whole bit of the loudest one in the room, put a sign on me saying, take me to jail kind of thing. Like, you're the weakest one in the room. Denzel, Frank Lucas has several moments in the film where he becomes the loudest, whether it's literally or he loses his temper like this. And every time he does, you can see the cracks in that facade kind of there. So he's not someone that takes his own advice all the time. And I think it's interesting, especially when you get to like the, where
his rules apply when he wants them.
Right. And it really comes to fruition. I think he finally understands when him and Richie are actually face to face at the table. He slaps the coffee off of the table and Richie nicely and calmly pushes the other one to him. I think that's such a great flip of just he understands. I've been the loudest one, and now I have no control on anything. So a lot of that, Ridley Scott, he's a master behind the camera. He really is. I feel like he doesn't get a lot of respect, and it's weird for me because I'll look through his whole filmography, and there's times where I'm like, ooh, I wasn't a big fan of that one. I don't think that one's that special. But then I'll rewatch some of his stuff, and it's like, dude, this guy is great.
He's such a visual filmmaker. I guess you could argue this film is one of his least visually inspired films, but I think that would be kind of harsh to say that anyway if you just watch this in isolation, because it is a really stylish film, and you're really immersed into this world, and the Vietnam scenes as well Bangkok rather feel very like rich, like they actually went there. I don't know if they did, but it felt like they did.
It felt like they really, I forget what country they were actually in, but it does feel a little more authentic. It doesn't feel like soundstage. It doesn't feel, I feel every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, I'm totally into the like 60s and 70s right now. This is crazy. I love it when a movie can actually pull off not just the look, but the feel of that whole time period. And I think American Gangster does such a great job of doing that. So
absolutely. The Thanksgiving scene, I quite liked, kind of the contrast between seeing this grand table with all of Frank's family at a table, and Frank brings out this giant turkey. You got really kind of fine cutlery and plates, and it's just huge. Everything's huge. While with Richie, he makes like a little turkey sandwich with crisps inside it, and he's kind of squishes it down, and you hear the crisps crunch. I would frankly have that, to be honest. Looks amazing.
Every time I watch that whole Thanksgiving, when you see him crush them and put them in the bread, every time I'm like, those are good sandwiches, folks. If you've never crunched, you say,
I want one.
I'll say chip. It's great. You gotta have this on a sandwich. It's so good.
Then with Josh Brolin's character, who kind of threatened to pay him like 10 grand a month, gets like a live turkey delivered to his door, then sees his car blow up.
And a bomb.
So that felt like a nice contrast with your main characters in this film, and it's kind of definitely done for humor, I would say. But then there's this kind of celebratory music going on while these scenes play out. Then the music kind of continues into the next scene as we see these people literally dying by taking drugs, and the mood kind of drops dramatically for me, and it sort of was a reminder that no, this is the biggest contrast in the film. The film doesn't shy away from the people that are truly being affected by what's going on.
The Happy Thanksgiving dinner, the big one with Frank Lucas, he's the one with the most extravagance, but he's the whole cause of the drug montage of people. The one that gets to me every time is the little child crying on the bed while the mom is OD'd right next to him. That's a tough scene. I mean, it's tough when they go from the car blowing up and you're like, and then it's immediate shooting up, and you're like, oh yeah, just because it's Thanksgiving doesn't mean that this pauses. Addiction doesn't just pause for a holiday. So the contrast is great, and it is very disarming. It's very just kind of grounding and humbling in a rough way.
I think my favorite scene, I would say, is I love the kind of the final shootout at this block of apartments where they're kind of processing the dope. Ridley certainly gets out his handheld cameras, and I loved how he establishes the geography of the situation, where you have Russell Crowe's group hiding around one corridor and John Hawkes around another, and there's a few shots that show this same woman dancing in the corridor from the point of view of both groups. So I kind of loved that part where one of the cops kind of pretends to be a junkie, and and then when he walks backwards and says 1, 2, 3.
When he counts it off.
Then it all kind of kicks off, and I loved how frantic the action is. There's literally like shots of gunfire that literally last milliseconds in the cutting. It's cut so quickly because it's not even jarring at all. Like rhythmically, it works so well for me, and I quite like the fact that the gunfight finishes pretty quickly, and then we kind of just go into a foot chase, and it just felt very realistic to me. So my favorite scene.
Man, my favorite scene has always been Frank Lucas's arrest coming out of the church.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Always been my favorite scene. Every time I watch it, like I love the whole movie, but every time they like go to church and the whole montage with your shootout that's all part. I'm like, but him walking out, just the way that him and Russell Crowe finally come face to face, and just that quiet like stare down that they do at each other.
No dialogue.
I think it speaks volumes to Denzel and Russell Crowe's performances and their talent, but it also speaks volumes for Ridley Scott's eye on how to just quietly, like we're not going to explain anything. Instantly you understand the severity of the whole thing, and you can see it completely in Denzel's performance in his eyes, and that little grin of like defeat that he has, where he has to accept this now. That's always been my favorite scene. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, when he kind of looks left down the street and there's cop cars blocking the road, looks the other way, cop cars blocking the road.
Yeah.
And moments before that when he comes out of the church with his family and he just says, wait here. And all you see in the background is a car, but you don't know you don't know if there's anyone there. And then the camera just subtly just pans to the right and you see Russell Crowe there.
Right, it just kind of moves over.
Yeah, so well done. Yeah, and he's just stood there just kind of leaning on the car.
Yeah.
And nothing is said.
No dialogue, but you don't need the dialogue. It's so good.
Yeah. And it's like, I got you, man. I
right,
got you.
It's all done.
Yeah. So directing score for me, yeah, this is really impressive. And as you say, Dustin, this is certainly a forgotten great movie from Ridley Scott. So yeah, I really liked it from a directional point of view. So yeah, 8.8 for me.
All right.
How about you, sir?
We are thinking the same page, my friend. Yeah, I've got mine. I kind of want to round up just because I want to be greedy.
Sure.
But I'm gonna be fair, and I'm gonna say the 8.8 is a great one. I just think his subtlety in directing, whether it's showing you the two different styles at the same time, telling the same story without making you feel like you're watching two different movies, and just all those little things that he does to remind you of what's going on the bigger scope. I think this is just one of his better directed films that he's done. So 8.8 for me.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Screenplay then. So the film obviously goes with dual stories following Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts' character. What's interesting though, as when you watch it, is that Frank Lucas feels very untouchable.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning of the film, his boss Bumpy dies and kind of leaves a power vacuum and does things very differently, where he basically just works for himself, no middlemen. The heroin is completely pure, and it's just really well done with his operation.
Mm-hmm.
And with Richie Roberts, you never get a sense that Richie Roberts will ever catch Frank Lucas. I never got that feeling, especially in that first hour. I'm like, dude, you got an uphill task.
Right, you got a ways to go, man. This movie's only 2.5 hours.
Yeah. He doesn't even get assigned to the case until 45 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
Josh Brolin's character as well as the corrupt detective feels more like a threat to Frank Lucas than Richie Roberts does to him. So
I agree with that. I do.
So it's just a really interesting power dynamics within the first hour or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the screenplay is it's a really unique one. Well, I shouldn't say a unique one. It's a fun one. Just with, like you said, Brolin's character of Trupo does feel almost like
he's the worst.
He's just the worst. Especially when he shoots the dog. I mean, that happens. Yeah. I think any actor who takes on a role where
John Wick's coming for you.
I'm killing a dog. Shoot. Everyone's going to hate me. And you're right. He does feel like the bigger threat, or at least the bigger immediate threat to Lucas. Whereas Roberts is, you kind of understand going into it of it's cop versus criminal. So obviously the cop will end up, with all the cards in his hand, or with the winning hand, But the way that the screenplay is written, where you're given their two different points of views, you're given the breakdown of how everything's going on in the world, how Frank's business is affecting normal people, but how it's also so ingrained into the law enforcement, which is what we're supposed to trust and uphold and all this stuff. It's I never take this as an anti-cop movie, which is something that Hollywood could easily slip into doing with it. But I think the screenplay was strong enough to just show you that there were corrupted cops during this time, that they were paid off, and that they kind of remind you this was a normal thing during this time period. Normal does not equal correct or good. This was just something that was happening.
Yeah, because I mean, the film certainly portrays Richie Roberts as a terrible family man. I mean, he's going through this whole custody court case with his wife and his son. He gets custody for his son, and he's screwing the lawyer as well.
I'm always like, isn't that a conflict of interest? Like, can't they get in trouble for that? I might be wrong. I don't know the law like in and out, but I feel like that would be.
Yeah. But I mean, it definitely feels like such an uphill task for Richie Roberts. Like, first he's basically got to battle his own colleagues before he can really get going on the Frank Lucas case, and even when he's knee deep in it, he's still got to battle his superiors. Like when he's at the airport, and they're like, when he clocks that, the dope is in the coffins.
Yeah,
and everyone's just like, what the fuck are you doing? Stay away from the coffins, you asshole. Like, have some respect.
Right.
Like, listen to me. I have the warrant. I can search where I want. And everyone's looking at him like, what a piece of shit.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, you get it. It's like, these are fallen soldiers.
Yeah, of course. Everyone feel like that. But because he knows and we know that Frank Lucas is such a heinous human being that he would do something like that.
Right.
So, it's just, I feel like he's fighting battles everywhere he turns, and like even with his friend as well. Can't remember the guy's name.
Well, his partner at the beginning, he's an uphill battle. Not only do you find out that his partner is all for the take, he's a junkie. And then he straight up murders a guy over drugs. And you're like, this is just, how do you ever, I would be getting out of there. I'd be like, you know what? I'm done. Like, we're moving across country. I'm getting away from all y'all.
and his friends like asked him to like stay away from Frank Lucas because he offered him like some sort of holiday home, I think.
Well, yeah, his friends are already known gangsters that are part of this world, and he's like, one of them is his son's godfather, and you're like, this is probably not the best decision making for a cop to have a gangster be a godfather, but
yeah. So it does feel like every turn he goes to, he's got a challenge to face.
Right.
So when he does get kind of this squad together of uncorruptible cops, I guess, they all kind of seem in the beginning a little like incompetent as well. But it's interesting how you kind of watch them sort of grow and work together as well. Certainly in those last scenes was quite satisfying to watch.
Well, they definitely, when you first meet the team that he assembles, it's at a bar, they're all drunk.
Yeah.
I mean, the dude that he's talking to is just doing shots in front of him. They're dancing pretty, I just lost the word, but you can tell that they're getting lucky that night. And Richie Roberts has that expression of like, are you kidding me? This is who you want. But then you see them working and it's a complete 180. They're very all for the, no, we're on point. We're doing this. We understand. You get that. Yeah. They don't look like your normal narcotics crew or what we would perceive as a normal narcotics crew, but they're very effective. I mean, they're very effective. I actually really appreciate that as Richie's telling them that their investigation's wrong, after they do all this big stuff with the mob that they're putting on the wall, all the photos and trying to connect the dots. And Richie tells them, we got to start all over. I feel like if it was any other movie, the lead investigator telling his team, we have to start all over, everyone would have groaned and thrown like a fit over how much work we did.
More coffee would fly through the office.
Whereas this movie does something different where it's just let's start over. No one argues that it's just an immediate, all right, we went down the wrong direction, so we'll start going. And that could have also been for pacing reasons. I don't know, but I think it lends to the strength of the movie that this team is actually there to do the work and not let their personal stuff kind of get in the way. So I appreciate that aspect a lot.
Yeah. So Frank's relationship with his brother Huey, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, the weak link in his empire, you could argue that he's very flashy and could expose their whole operation. That was kind of interesting to see. Plus, he kind of has issues with his cousin too, who wants to be like him and turns down a career playing for the Yankees. And I feel like they never fully get into Frank's relationship with his brother and his cousin. I would like to have seen more of that for me personally. Maybe I'm just feeling a bit greedy with that, but especially, Frank thinks that his cousin wanting to be like him.
Yeah.
That feels like really juicy stuff that they kind of just go over in one scene, in one bit of dialogue. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And they just, it did feel like through Denzel's acting that kind of cut through a bit. But yeah, they just move on very quickly. So that was slightly disappointing. But yeah, just a minor gripe. But
that's a good man.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever focused on it too much, but that's a good point, because I am curious to know, what would Frank Lucas actually have, how would he have actually kind of processed that?
Because he's always kind of, in the beginning, he's always looking up to Bumpy in those opening scenes. He's always looking up to people, whereas he's never had he's never had a kid that wants to be like him. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, there was that moment where he was like, are you sure, dude?
Right.
What?
You kind of have I think internally you hope that he would be like, hey man, go live a better life. You would hope that there'd be some kind of redemptive thing. Of course, they kind of answer how he responds with is it his cousin or nephew, or it's his nephew? It's his nephew.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
They kind of answer how he responds, because his nephew later on in the movie is seen walking around with a machine gun or whatever.
Right.
Kind of running part of the operation. So you're kind of like, oh yeah, he really has no morals. He's letting his nephew throw this career away that he would have had in baseball for heroin. Yay. But I do think that would have been an interesting dynamic to see them dive a little bit further into. I would have wanted to see, not necessarily with the family. Well, no, I take that back. I would have wanted to see more between his mom and how she's trying to process this lifestyle. She does tell him at one point, I never ask where all this comes from. I never ask you where the money's coming from, but you are messing this up. I kind of wish they would have shown more between him and his mom. Right. I would imagine there had to have been some pretty intense arguments, or his mom trying to be like, whatever you're doing, clearly everything we have now, this extravagance, is not good.
No, you get this sense that his mom is very blinded by all the grandeur and the house, and I feel like that's kind of the point they're making. And you get that little scene towards the end where she feels like Denzel is messing all this up. All these cops have kind of just raided their house without even knowing anything about what the hell's going on.
Yeah,
and that's kind of the only real kind of realization moment for the mum character. But I agree. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that, because you don't want to assume that she's that blinded by all this. She's not that stupid. So,
I mean, she's his mom. Moms are pretty perceptive.
Yeah,
they're pretty intuitive.
Absolutely.
So I feel like even blinded by the extravagance, as a mom, I feel she still would have called her son out with, you gotta, this isn't right at all.
Yeah. Where them drugs at? So kind of the boxing scene for me feels like a turning point in the film, or one of the turning points in the film, where things start to kind of flip in each of the characters' kind of trajectory. Richie takes a photo of Frank, who has better seats than a known gangster. Plus, Frank's wearing a really flashy coat that his wife got him, which in turn, he's warned his brother about this, doing this kind of same thing.
The loudest in the room.
Yeah. Frank gets Josh Brolin on his radar as well, then I think you could argue that the film sort of kind of fast tracks the detective work for Richie's character a little bit. Just a little bit of a minor gripe there, but like the only other thing I would say is that when Richie thinks the dope is coming in from the coffins, I think the film takes a bit too long to actually confirm that fact before the film can kind of move on. But because they kind of get brought in to this little room, and then this other military guy has a right go at him, and you really want to kind of punch him in the face at that point as well. But yeah, it's just a little thing there that I felt like they could have got to the fact that the drugs are in the coffin a little bit sooner, but just a little thing.
Yeah.
For me. Just slows the pace down a little bit.
Yeah, I could see that. I would say it's not necessarily the pace kind of gets a little ramped up, or not ramped up, but a little hiccupy. What kind of always, for some reason, I think it's just the guy's performance. He's not a bad actor. I've seen him in other stuff, but there's just something about his character. But it is that agent that shows up that takes him into the room. That character, I don't know if it's the performance or just how the character was written, combination, whatever it is. He's kind of my primary gripe, because it always seems to be like every performance in this movie, it's so good. Everyone feels natural. Everyone feels so like in the flow. His feels forced. And it feels kind of a little more clunky compared to everybody else's. So I'm always kind of like, oh, whatever. And then he throws out his little, anti-Semitic term. And it's every time you're like, like, really?
Yeah.
Like, all right.
It's frustrating because you got that kind of energy from the other military guys before he gets moved into that little room. So I don't know why they
having it.
Yeah, like, it's a scene that could be cut. I think.
You're building off of it. I think they could have done. I think they could have melded it a little bit differently. Maybe had a little bit different direction, or maybe a little bit different dialogue during that whole scene. I think the weird part about the drugs in the coffin aspect of that sequence is they try to make it as like kind of a shocking reveal that the drugs are in fact in these coffins, but
it takes too long.
I remember when the movie was coming out, everyone was like, it's about Frank Lucas, the guy who smuggled heroin in soldiers' coffins. So it was like, there's there's not an aha moment here. Everyone knows. So that would be my only kind of gripe, is just the way that part of it was handled was it's not a surprise for us. Like, it's shocking in of itself, the fact that he did this. I think what they could have done differently was shown Frank Lucas and the military guys in Bangkok coming up with that plan.
Yeah.
I think that would have been maybe a bit stronger, maybe add more to that performance of that agent. Yeah, that's really my only gripe in terms of that scene. I really don't have a lot to gripe about on this, except it is the screenplay one. I kind of have to shake my head a slight bit, because the movie is so strong on every front except how much embellishing they did in this script. And that kind of like, okay. Like when you hear like the real Frank Lucas and the real Richie Roberts and some of the people that were actually around that they had as consultants, people coming around being like, oof, they did not. All right.
Yeah. So interesting and funny lines. Certainly one that popped out for me was quite interesting. Come on, Richie, fuck me like a cop, not a lawyer. That was quite funny.
I think it's funnier hearing you say it like that than it was in the movie.
The loudest one in the room is the weakest one in the room. Yeah, we've spoke about that. Like Frank Lucas does some interesting insults as well. Like I think when he's getting really annoyed at his family, he says "Simple Simon ass motherfuckers." That was cool. Have you got any, Dustin?
See, I've got a couple. A lot of them are Denzel.
Yeah.
I mean, when that dude
Yeah.
speaks in this movie, there's a lot of times where, like, whether it's a ridiculous line, like the one you just said, or very small lines, you find yourself, or at least I find myself, like, intrigued by it. Maybe not in a good way, but you're just like, you have to give him your attention. No matter what he's saying, you're going to give him your attention for it. The one that always gets me is it's just 20%. And the reason it does is just the cadence that he says it, whether it's right before, when he's at the diner and the guy's telling him like, hey, it takes 20%. And he's sitting there and just like 20% and slides him the dollar bill. Or, the really effective one where he says 20% and puts the money into a jar next to his blown off head.
Yeah.
It's just, that is always such a, like, for a line that is literally just 20%, it's so effective. Funny lines is, I get a kick out of Richie Roberts telling him, hey, Frank, there's a line for that one too.
Yeah.
In terms of people that want to kill them. I have to laugh every time when Lucas is talking to Nikki about product and infringement and all this. It's very much like,
we're going to call it red managing.
Yeah, I don't give a fuck. Like, I have to laugh because I'm like, he is a drug kingpin talking about product placement and product infringement and copyright issues for heroin. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that part cracks me up a lot.
Just talking about it like any other business.
Yeah. And then, of course, when they're in the courtroom and the ex-wife looks at her lawyer and goes, well, he's clearly fucking her. Like, who says that in the courtroom? But all right.
Yeah. Like a cop, not a lawyer.
Yeah, they always make me smirk or, really hone in on the attention to it. So
yeah. One from Denzel I liked. They look at me like it's Christmas and I'm Santa Claus. That was good. Oh, in that kind of like last scene in that interview room between Frank and Russell Crowe, Richie Roberts, and Frank says, it don't mean nothing to me of you if you show up tomorrow morning with your head blown off. Do you understand what I'm saying? And then Roberts is like, yeah, Frank, get in line. That one stretches around the block too.
That one stretches around the block too.
But I think my favourite, though, is actually fairly near the beginning from Bumpy, where he says, you can't find the heart of anything to stick the knife. He says it like a lot slower than I just did, but like he says it while he's dying, and it just kind of sets up this whole film that times are changing, in the late 60s. Things are just done differently. Yeah, so that was just a really kind of interesting line to set up your whole film, really, for Frank's trajectory in this whole saga.
Mm-hmm. My favorite line, see, that's a tough one, because the Bumpy line is great. A lot of what Bumpy says at the beginning is really, like, it sets up the movie really, really well. It really gives you an understanding of Frank Lucas and where he's coming from after Bumpy passes away. I think when his wife tells him that they are leaving after the attempt on their life, after the drive-by, him explaining to her why they can't go, why it doesn't matter if they leave. I think that's really good. That's just good dialogue between him and his wife. But I think my favorite is actually his mom talking to him and calling him out. I think that whole bit is just so well written. It's very effective. Even if I think that, how did the mom let it go this far?
Yeah.
That's really good. Of course, as I'm talking, that I'm like, ooh, but I think one of the most like kind of stomach turning moments where you're like, ooh, okay, so he's still Frank Lucas, is when Trupo actually stops him that first time, and they're looking at the dope in the trunk of the car, and Trupo's making those threats to him, and he responds with, how would you like your house blown up next time? I think that's such a, because he's already kind of
says it so calmly.
He says it so calm. When he's making the threat, he's back to his normal cadence, but just seconds before that, he's kind of a little bit off balance. Hey Frank, yo, hey, what? He's
My
like,
man.
he's vulnerable, but him making that threat, it puts him right back into why he's so dangerous. So I think the how would you like your house to blow next time? I think that might be my favorite.
Yeah, such a casual threat.
Yeah.
Screenplay score for me, yeah, it's really impressive. I think I'll go a little bit lower than directing, though, just because I wouldn't say rush, but there are things that I think they could have maybe done a little bit differently with certainly Ritchie's detective work and come to a quicker conclusion with the coffins and the drugs. So, but other than that, like, it's still very, very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go like an 8.5 for me.
Wow.
How about you, sir?
Oh, man. Well, this might be a little shocking then. I want to go a little bit lower than you.
All right.
I think the reason I'm going just a little bit lower does actually come down to Ridley Scott's, whenever he makes a movie that's based on actual events, he steers so far away. And normally, like, I'm really forgiving of this aspect from filmmakers, but I think why I'm holding this one a little bit more kind of like, come on, guys, is it's so much closer in history. This should have been easier history to make more accurately, considering it was not that long ago. What, 40 years ago, 50 years ago? Well, even less when this came out, because this was 2007. So I go a little bit, I'm a little bit more hard on it just for that aspect, just because there are still people alive who were actually a part of it. And you still kind of mess this up. Whereas in terms of like, if you're making a historical movie that took place when none of this was around, it would make sense why you're going to kind of fill in the gaps or make up your own stuff.
They would be giving it like 4s and 5s. Well, that didn't happen.
Right. So for that, and like what you and I talked about with the drugs and the coffin thing, how we both kind of feel it could have been handled just a little bit differently, written a little bit differently. I'm actually going to go at just an 8, just a solid 8 on this one. So not too much lower than you, but a little bit lower. It is still excellent. By no means do I watch it and think the whole time like, oh God, they missed the mark on this. No, I still enjoy it fully, but when you break it down, those are the things that stand out to me. So
awesome. Right, acting. Then I loved the acting between Denzel Washington and Idris Elba in the first hour. Like, the first meeting is at Bumpy's wake.
They're like 2 scenes that they have together, or 3 scenes?
Yeah, 3 scenes, Like, and Idris Elba is not making, like, a scene at this wake, but he just looks very untidy and not behaving like he should at a wake. And he puts a glass down on this table, and Denzel is watching this play out. And you can tell he's fuming inside just with his eyes, like, and yet he's hardly doing anything. Like, Denzel comes up to him and doesn't say anything and just wipes the water off the table and puts Idris's glass on a coaster. Idris just finds it weird and almost is offended by it and just says, "Go get me a light while you're at it." Denzel just gives him this cold look and walks away. Then the next time they meet, it's at this cafe, and Idris, like the scene you were talking about, Dustin, and Idris is asking for his 20%. And Denzel is not stupid. He's just letting him talk away while he's eating his breakfast, looking very relaxed. Denzel just kind of taps his teaspoon on the mug quite aggressively, as if, Idris isn't even there. The dynamics when he gets up completely flips when, like, Denzel completely works out what he's trying to do and jokingly tips him 20% like he's a waiter. That was quite funny. Then the last time they meet, Denzel isn't messing about and leaves his table of friends and family at breakfast and threatens Idris with his gun, asking for his own 20%. And then before the tension has a chance to build, he pulls the trigger and you're like, holy shit.
It's
some great scenes between those two.
Man, I think the acting, with the exception of the one agent that pops up, but again, I think that was more just writing, whatever. But the acting from everyone, this was one of those. It's one of those movies where when you watch it, you can tell from the get-go, everyone came on board of just understanding the level of performance that they needed to bring to it, and they do.
And like Idris Elba in those scenes is not quite in like the wire mode, but like he still brings a level of quality that's just, especially very early in his career. But so good.
You understand he's a threat just from, and you never see him actually being gangster, but you understand just the way he holds himself, how he talks, how he's presenting himself, that he is a dangerous person. I think that speaks a lot of volumes. And he's a great actor. We all know this. He's a fantastic actor.
I mean, he wears that hat well.
Man, I'm not one that cares about fashion too much, but there is a lot of
questionable fashion
choices in this movie where it's like, thank God we are not in the 70s anymore. Because good Lord.
Some of the suits Chiwetel Ejiofor is wearing, I'm like, dude, what the hell is that? I'm with Denzel with that. I'm like, come on, man. Everyone needs to wear sunglasses.
Oh, when Denzel shows up wearing the fur coat that his wife got him, every time I just shake my head. I'm like, I don't know if it's just because I'm so disconnected from this stuff that I have the luxury to like think this, but every time I'm like, the moment I see these guys wearing these flashy suits and those fur coats, I'm like, you are not threatening in any sense. I think you look like a joke. I just do.
But I think certainly in that boxing scene, like Denzel kind of realizes that in the end when he decides to throw it in the fire. Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's a total, like, that's what got him noticed. That's what, he put a target on his back.
Because he's trying to impress his wife and he's trying to relax a little bit and not trying to like put on this gangster persona like all the time, you know, and that's certainly an error in judgment for his character. And he just doesn't know it at the time.
Everyone's performance in this is incredible. Obviously, Denzel Washington carries this movie on his back. Oh, yeah. So does Russell Crowe. They both, they bring a lot of intensity on two different dynamics into it. I think it's one of my favorite parts, though, is you brought it up when they're doing the raid at the end and the cop instantly goes into like, oh, I'm going to play a junkie. And the way that he's like going down the hallway and fully acts like a junkie wanting a fix. And then he does the countdown. But the way that he mixes the countdown with all of that, I think it's just so well done. It's a little piece of acting. It lasts maybe 40 seconds in the whole scheme of the movie. But his transition from the tension and how are we, you got a kid running around the hallway. You've got that lady who's clearly inebriated, dancing around and singing.
Yeah.
You have Gangster sitting in the hallway with these guys. I mean, there's a lot of tension going on. And for him to be able to like sway into that role, both, to blend in and then come right back into the big like shakedown of all of it. I think that's such a great little piece of acting that I always mispronounce the guy's name, and I grew up with the Wu-Tang Clan, so I apologize. But you guys know who I'm talking about. Cool. It's little things like that. Great acting. If you don't want to go with the obvious, that little scene is just, it always stands out to me.
Yeah.
So
I love the acting from John Ortiz in the ambulance with Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
After Russell Crowe's character saves him from this mob outside these projects. Like in the ambulance, John Ortiz is all sweaty and nervous, and you can even see drool coming out of his mouth like he's a dog or
giant
something.
Spit that's coming out. Yeah.
And he doesn't even notice that it's happening, I feel like. And Russell Crowe is not fooled at all and looks increasingly angry while Ortiz is looking increasingly nervous. And before you know it, he's jumped out of the ambulance.
and running away. Yeah.
Yeah. Great acting in that scene for me, especially from John Ortiz.
I really like John Hawkes. Every time that he pops up in a movie, it's always in like smaller roles, supporting roles, but he's excellent every time. And he's great in this of just how matter of fact he is. You know, at the bar, you and I talked about it a little bit ago. He's doing shots and talking about the team, but he has that, he's able to convey and make you understand, like, we're going to be on point. Like, you don't have to worry about us. We're a pack of shield. This is how it is. When do we start? And you understand immediately, like, he will be on point. Like, every time, the first time I watched it, it was I don't question that this team is going to have one of those Hollywood tropes where one member of the team trips up and ruins the whole operation. It's like, no, I'm pretty positive these guys are going to hold it together until the very end. Yeah. And they do. So, yeah, the acting.
John Hawkes, we trust.
Yeah. From everybody, from small roles to big roles. I mean, the acting is on point. She did win an Oscar or nominated. The lady that plays his mom, she's excellent.
Oh, yeah. Armand Asante as Dominic Chicano is really good. I feel like he's maybe, I don't know, overacting a little bit as this kind of stereotypical Italian gangster. But I feel like the more he's on, certainly in those initial scenes he has with Denzel Washington, but the more he's on screen, it kind of sat a bit better with me. Yeah, he's really good in the end. So yeah, I quite liked his performance in all those kind of those tweed outfits.
Yeah. I can't help but feel for Cuba Gooding Jr. because this came out after he was already kind of blacklisted after he did Boat Trip, which is probably a movie he wishes would never get mentioned ever. But yeah, I saw Boat Trip. It was a bad movie. But this was like kind of that, you can see that like what made him so great in the 90s and early 2000s kind of coming back. And I remember being like, ooh, Cuba's coming back. This is awesome. And, you know, he just did this Ridley Scott. He's got a scene directly with Denzel. It's an intense scene where they're mad at each other. Awesome. And then he went bye-bye. But his little scene in this is good. It's really good. And it's nice to see the Cuba Gooding Jr. that we know. I think I'll always wish for his career to like come back. I keep waiting for him to have like his Brendan Fraser moment where he's going to come, and research into the limelight.
Matthew McConaughey or something like that.
Yeah, man, Cuba Gooding Jr. in his heyday, that dude was a performer. Jerry Maguire, Men of Honor is one that stands out heavily for me. So
yeah. I love the acting from Denzel Washington and Russell Crowe in that interview near the end of the film. Like, Russell Crowe is brilliant as he's trying hard not to give away anything. You know, Denzel is trying to like push his buttons the whole time to try and find something to like bribe him with. They sort of play chess with the coffee cup as well.
The coffee cup.
Yeah. Like, that's checkmate. Nope. That's checkmate to you. Love that sort of stuff. Yeah. That was a really good scene.
I feel every time I watch it, I'm like, I think him slapping the coffee, I don't think that was scripted.
Slaps a lot of drinks in this movie.
He does. But I don't think the coffee cup was scripted. I don't know. There's something in his performance when he does it.
Oh, yeah. I definitely got that sense.
Where you're he did that right then. That is fantastic. What makes it so great is because he shows you in that aggression, that's where he's always actually vulnerable. And I think he totally understands in that moment he's screwed. Like, even worse than what he probably initially thought. And I love how Russell Crowe plays right next to him. Because, you know, Russell Crowe, his career is full of loud, very active, very angry, very, you know, outspoken characters, and he's sitting there patiently, quietly, and just smiling, watching Frank Lucas loses cool.
But you can see it on his face that he's physically trying to hold himself back.
Right.
You know?
Like, you can see that practice of self-control. I think it's just them two together is excellent. Just excellent. And for people that saw them previously in, I think it was 99 in Virtuosity, where they actually, the roles were reversed, where Crowe was the mass murdering jerk and Denzel was the cop coming to find him.
Okay.
I don't remember the movie too well, but I remember it being
Not seen it.
okay. But yeah, their dynamic is so good. Obviously, if you're going to bring up acting in this movie, you're not going to skip over the two leads because they carry the entire film.
Yeah.
And it does blow my mind that they only share scenes together at the very end.
Yeah, I like that though. I love that.
Yeah.
You're kind of waiting for that this whole movie for 2.5 hours or 3.
For 2.5 hours. Yeah, they don't actually see each other.
Depending on what cut.
No, that timing's about right. That's about right.
Also at the end, it just feels such a satisfying feeling when they're working together to find all the corrupt cops. I always love that in films where the bad guy and the good guy have got to work together to achieve a goal, and yeah, it's always just really satisfying.
It is satisfying, and they do it. Yeah. You do feel kind of like a breath as they start putting up the text on the conclusion of the film, right? And the music kind of comes up. Yeah, it is satisfying, and those two do such a good job of making you feel that satisfaction, you know, when he starts clapping him at the end of the investigation and they're laughing together and stuff. You don't get the sense that they're best friends and everything's A-okay. You just understand, like, job well done. This is a long road, this job has been stretched for a long time at this point with a lot of bad things. So you're able to just kind of like breathe. Finally. The acting is it's so good in this movie. It's so good.
Favorite performance though, who are you going with?
Man, it's a cliche. I don't want to sound cliche, but you can't deny it. Denzel this is one of those movies where he just is always reminding us why he's Denzel Washington, right?
Yeah.
He is a powerhouse. So Denzel takes the cake. Just all the things that he does, from how he's portraying the vulnerability in his outbursts of violence, or how cold-hearted he is when he's killing. And then, him with his wife, him with his mom, him with his brother. It's just his performance he shows a lot that I think you don't really get the first time you watch it. But the more you watch this movie, the more you start seeing his range with this cold-hearted character. So he's my favorite. I love Denzel. He's so good.
I'm going John Hawkes. No, I'm going Denzel Washington. Denzel, absolutely. Acting score for me. Yeah, I'm hitting the 9s. Yep. I think Denzel is that good. He's not doing... I feel like it's not a particularly showy performance, but like he's showing like really good aggressive range, if that's a phrase, when he needs to, and it's a very calm and controlled performance. He kind of has this quiet, calm rage about him, which I quite like in this film. So I'll go like a 9.2 for me. Yeah, I mean the whole cast is great as well. So, 9.2.
This is one where I'm going to go higher than you. I just think the fact that you can tell people brought their A game, even if they don't have scenes with Russell Crowe or with Denzel Washington, but you can just tell that everyone showed up with the understanding of the level of acting they need to bring. And then, Denzel, him and Russell are so good in this movie.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go with a 9.5 because there's so many performances in this movie that just you find yourself wanting to see more from that actor, even if their role is super small. They're just people brought their A game for this movie. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Right, let's add up the scores then for American Gangster.
Woo-hoo.
American Gangster gets 52.8, which is pretty impressive. Very impressive.
Yeah.
That's it for part 1. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 2 to see who wins. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell me what your favourite films are relating to the episode. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast. For X at FVF_podcast. Plus, we are now on YouTube, so hit that like button and comment there. If you do, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.